Okay, hey Chris, we're recording now. So you want me to start this? So last time I thought I didn't want to look at myself because it was distracting. And so I hid the view for me from the screen so I could just look at you. But then when I looked at the recording of the video was just you talking and me kind of being this off-screen sort of voice who would talk from the mist. So today, hopefully, we've got this set up where we can do a video podcast and we're both on video.
So another layer to this idea of being lost.
Mm.
We were just talking how we should record our conversations prior to recording. So now we're kind of doing it, sort of, right?
Right, right, right. You said we should record it and then just at some point kind of say, oh, hey, welcome to the podcast, like 5 minutes in or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
I said that would be great, but you should have told me 5 minutes ago so we could have been doing that already. So anyway, what are we talking about today,
Start
Chris?
with a story. Let's start with a story. We've got a couple of them lined up, I think.
Okay.
And I think you have one. I'd like to hear your story, and then I'll share mine, and then we'll see what happens.
Okay. That sounds good. We also had this joke, though, just a minute ago, though we're missing this piece of the joke, that we're going to do like a metacognition podcast where we spend a lot of time talking about looking at the podcast from above instead of being, attached to the podcast or in it, just like in meditation with your thoughts, where you kind of observe your thoughts rather than be one with your thoughts. But I don't know if that would be very interesting.
I think it'd be terribly boring. I'd
Yeah.
turn it off right now, actually.
Okay. All right. So we'll maybe another time we'll try that. See, you wanted the story, the Chenrezig story.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this comes from Tibetan Buddhism, and um, the story. An interesting thing with the story is Chenrezig is known by a lot of other names and other traditions of Buddhism. So in some traditions, she's a woman. In some traditions, he's a man. So Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara, Kuan Yin are all kind of the same being. But this is one story out of Tibetan Buddhism about Chenrezig. And so Chenrezig was a sensitive soul, and he looked around him and saw there was suffering everywhere and made this vow and said, I vow to alleviate all suffering in all sentient beings. Otherwise, let me burst into 1,000 pieces. And so Chenrezig got to worked diligently, alleviating suffering for decades, and then looked around and saw there was as much suffering as when he started, maybe even more, because there's infinite beings, and so there's always infinite suffering that's arising. And so Chenrezig, being true to his vow, burst into 1,000 pieces. And at that point, though, the story didn't end. The thing is, for burnout, that's where a lot of burnout stories end,
Hmm.
where, in hospitals and clinics around the country and around the world, people make this noble vow and they work really hard. They do what they're supposed to do. And then there's just unlimited suffering. There's ever more suffering. And then they get the suffering as well. Like they've been trying to alleviate the suffering, and then they're suffering at the same time they're alleviating suffering. And the bursting into 1,000 pieces is like burnout. But in Chenrezig's case, there was a wise mentor, Amitabha, the Buddha Amitabha, saw Chenrezig and said, this was a noble vow that you made. It's impossible to eliminate all suffering, but I'm going to put you back together because this was a noble vow. I'm going to put you together, though, not how you were. This isn't a resilient story where you bounce back to who you were before all this started to happen. And it's not where you're unaffected by suffering. Instead, I'm going to put you back together with 1,000 arms so you can better touch suffering, and to give you 1,000 eyes so you can better see suffering. So Chenrezig is put back together, and the image a lot of times is of this being with all these kind of heads and arms and
Okay. Yeah.
eyes, um, who is more capable of seeing and feeling suffering. And so then Amitabha says, I would like you to retake your vow but this time realizing that the measure of success is not eliminating suffering. The measure of success is just in seeing and touching suffering and doing something about it.
That's a great story.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a great, the thing about stories is there's so many different ways that you can approach them. You know, they have so many different metaphors and images. Um, and I'm always tempted to try and explain it right away. And then also tempted to like just let it sit.
Yeah. Joey, let that one sit.
Yeah, why not?
Well, I want, would you let me sneak in two stories?
I figured that. I budgeted that. Actually, I budgeted Chris's one story. I crossed it off and had Chris's two stories. I crossed that off and it said Chris probably will tell three stories. So it's in the outline.
Thank you. This comes from ancient Greece, and there's this great hero god, Heracles, and he was invited to this cave, and in this cave they were kind of having this party, and there was this person named Chiron, Chiron, and this kind of person was wise, was a centaur, and also was known to be a great healer, in fact, a master healer. But Heracles, thought, I'm going to go to this party. I think I'll bring some really good wine. And so Heracles brought some really good wine. And you see, the centaurs, they're not used to that good wine. And all of a sudden, they were drinking and probably a little too much. They got into some ruckus, a little bit of fighting. And lo and behold, part of that fighting, Chiron was actually shot in the knee by Heracles, got wounded. And you think, well, Chiron's got this great ability as a master healer to take care of this. But what he didn't know is the arrow was tipped in poison, and that this particular wound, despite and even though Chiron was this great master healer, was not able to fully heal it. And so Chiron lived with this particular wound, all of his life. And what came out of that was that he really became this archetype of a wounded healer. And out of the cave that Chiron lived, he received and trained thousands and thousands of students in this particular cave. And it's said that one of the students, who I know you are familiar with, is Asclepius. And Asclepius kind of learned the knowledge of plants, learned the knowledge of the serpent, the wisdom of the serpent, the wisdom of the wounded healer. And of course, Asclepius then, I think, went on in the lineage of Hippocrates in terms of the practice and art of medicine. So that's another story, as we were kind of talking about, that I was thinking about, thought that I might read it.
Is the story coming yet, or is that the story?
That's the story.
That's the story. Okay. I thought you said you might read it.
I was kind of looking at it as I was.
Oh, okay. Yeah. 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 So Asclepius, I don't know how you pronounce these old Greek names. Do you know for sure how you said Asclepius?
I said Asclepius, but I've heard it pronounced different.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
it's pronounced differently, and I probably didn't pronounce it correctly.
I don't know if doctors pronounce it either, but Asclepius is what I've heard. So, but yeah, that story is another one of Chiron is the reason Chiron is such a good healer is because Chiron has an unhealing wound. So he's the archetype of the wounded healer who through being in touch with his own suffering is more in touch with the suffering of others and knows how to minister to them. And so that's sort of the like the hero's journey too. This is a great kind of example of the hero's journey. I was going along, in my life, minding my own business, and Heracles brought a bunch of wine to the party, and then I got shot with a Medusa poison tipped arrow. And and now I've got an unhealing wound. But now, through that unhealing wound, I am able to become an even better healer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Chenrezig, same thing, through the wound, that the wound actually opens up into um, a greater, deeper source of healing. And that's what concerns me sometimes in our narratives about burnout and resilience is we think if we're resilient, we'll prevent burnout. But what if burnout is the very thing that's going to help us become better healers?
Well, that's sort of what you argue in your book, isn't it? I mean, a bit of that.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Rumi has this great little poem. I know we're supposed to save the poem to the end, but
It's okay. Prepare for Chris to do the ending at the beginning. I've got that on the list here too.
Rumi says, trust your wound, what we're talking about, to a teacher's surgery.
Hmm.
Flies collect on the wound, they cover it. Those flies of your self-protective feelings, your love for what you think is yours, let a teacher wave away the flies and put a plaster on the wound. Don't turn your head. Don't turn your head. Keep looking at the bandaged place. That's where the light enters you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the theme of what we're looking at
Yeah.
on our second podcast, is this idea of healthy, true human healers. Now, one of the things Dr. Kopacz that I failed to ask you about the last time, what do you mean by true human? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Well, there's two ways to answer that, Chris. There's what I think about it, and then there's the go ask Joseph Rael, beautiful painted arrow. Because I got it from him. It's like a chapter in being in vibration, something about becoming true human. So, I chose that as the title for putting up some of the videos that Joseph and I have done. So that's my YouTube channel, or our
Right.
YouTube channel now. Mhm.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But the other, that's the non-answer answer. The answer is in many societies, in many indigenous cultures, people aren't thought to be born into being true humans. Although Joseph Rael will say, children are born shamans, and that a society should base itself around the divinity of the children that are born. But many cultures have an idea that you have to do something like 4 years of Sundance, or you have to do something in order to achieve your full humanity. It's not just given to you. And I think that's also the idea of, different types of practices as well. That this is kind of how I think with in the book, with the different caring for self practices, is a practice is something that's a continuous thing that you engage in, that you never reach the end. And so, becoming a true human would mean not that you do a bunch of work and you're a true human once and for all, but becoming a true human means to be engaged in the project of getting in touch or manifesting your humanity.
In my way, again, thinking of that poem, it's kind of like not turning our head away from our humanity,
Yeah.
but keep looking, and even keep looking in the wounded areas, the bandaged places, where the arrow is, where the suffering may be, and that's where light. Well, is there light there? I mean, that's what Rumi says.
Mm-hmm.
That the light enters you.
Yeah, that's what Leonard Cohen says too.
Right.
Mm-hmm. that
So
the
part
cracks are where the light gets in. Hmm.
so part of it is we're kind of exploring those cracks, I think,
Hmm.
in this podcast. And part of what we're looking at is we're looking at the healthy, true human healers.
Yeah.
Have you ever met one?
Yeah. This guy, Christmas, Chris Smith. I think he's one. I don't know. Have you ever seen, do you ever look in the mirror?
I try to avoid a mirror every time. I was listen to this, I was in a hotel
Mm,
uh, about a month ago,
mm,
and I got up in the middle of the night and I stood up, and there was this
mm,
door that led to the washroom. It had a big mirror. And I walked up to that door, because I had to stand up,
mm.
and I saw
Yeah.
myself, and it scared me.
Mm,
I thought it was
mhm.
somebody else.
Yeah.
So I've tried to look at myself, but it's not, it's not gone so well.
Hmm. Yeah. I thought about your question. And I mean, some of the healers that I've met who were the most inspirational also had some wounds, and the dedication to healing can actually be a wound. Because if you're 100%, people like, I don't know, Mother Teresa, maybe she's not a good example. Um,
I love that you just said Mother Teresa is not a great example. I
yeah.
mean, how are you gonna we can't edit this, I mean.
Well, okay, so here's my thinking. I'm thinking about people who are so dedicated to healing that other parts of their life suffer.
Yeah.
They put their patients first and they put themselves second. So their health suffers. So I don't know. I mean, a, a perfect balance is something that can be achieved only for a moment. Um, and then you're trying to recover and recapture that balance again. So I don't know. When I think about people who've inspired me and tried to emulate, at some point I also realized, wow, well, here's the shadow side or the dark side of their commitment to whatever this is.
I was thinking of Mother Teresa, and I have to confess, it's been a while since I've read this, but
Has it been a
it
while since your confession?
yeah, that too. Uh, in some of her writings, just how much she struggled.
Mm,
An
yeah.
element of woundedness.
Mm,
She questioned everything,
yeah.
and so it
Mm,
was certainly present. The thing that I find myself impressed with her and other healers is how they may have doubts or suffering, and yet still choose to continue as best as they can to go about the work of healing and caring for others. That's to me inspiring.
mhm. Yeah. Despite the wound, they continue the healing project. Hmm. Yeah. Thoughts going in a couple different directions.
Well, let's go with the first
Okay.
direction.
Yeah. So at one point, a couple of years ago, before the pandemic even, I had this realization, I was studying a lot of hero's journey stuff, and I was studying a lot of this healer and wounded healer stuff. And I realized, being a healer is one of the most selfless, kind of archetypal things that you can enter into. It's this service, it's a life of service. And yet the only way that people can become healers is there's got to be a wound somewhere, either a wound in themselves or a wound in someone else. If we lived in a world where no one was wounded, there would be no healers. And we wouldn't have this kind of pinnacle of um, service to others. And similarly with heroism, if there was no dark time, no challenging time, there would be no need for heroism. So both of these things that we really value in the culture and value, back through arts and literature and mythology of heroes and healers, they're only possible because of the wound and because of the challenging times.
That's so true. When I think of what motivated me or inspired me to go into marriage and family therapy was growing up in a chaotic home.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that was my motivation. It's like there was just part of me that, a big part of me, that was wanting to try to figure that out and to relive it through other families, to study it,
Mm-hmm.
to try to understand it that way. And ultimately, part of it was helping me to heal from that. So it very much is a part of my journey. And you know, the cool thing, I think you know this, but what was so interesting is, you know, I grew up in a very rural, you know, some of those stories, very rural,
Yeah.
just to say, area. And what was so interesting is I had this insight actually when I was traveling in Europe, that marriage and family therapy is something, and why it happened there,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's another whole tangent about taking a journey outside of your familiar world. And sometimes when you move outside of what you're familiar with, your routines, it can make space for things to happen, thoughts and, you know, different ideas. So it happened there. I knew it. I felt it. And so, you know, after then doing the training, what was so interesting is I ended up working probably most of my career, almost 25 years, in like a very similar setting, a rural setting. And I just felt like that was kind of like a way to give back. So
Mm-hmm.
this idea of, you know, what you were saying about wounded healers, of giving back, of service, I mean, that was really fulfilling for me, to be able to give back kind of in a very similar, I kind of knew the culture a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and felt like felt like I had some traction, some purpose, some meaning.
Yeah. So we know this intellectually, you know, this that there's suffering is ubiquitous, that being a wounded healer can make us a better healer. But I wonder, Chris, I mean, have you had resentment about being sick, about your own health problems?
Every day.
Me too. Yeah.
I have. I have. I mean, it limits so much of what I can do. Um, yeah. All I can say is, yeah, it can be really heavy. I think the thing that I notice a lot is, and tell me if this is true for you, it can be so easy for me when I'm going through more of a difficult patch with my own health to be um, nourished by negative thinking, negative bias,
Mm.
uh, difficult thoughts, projections and negative projections into the future. Um, so it's something that I think I notice. I will say, as I've aged, because I've been fortunate to have many different illnesses in my life. I've been very privileged.
Mm.
Um, that has given some perspective that for me has been helpful. Like I'm not the only one. I used to think I was the only one,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and just this week, you know, just hearing, I had an opportunity to um, talk with someone that has the same particular disease I have, who happens to be 15. And then hearing from others that, you know, they drive to work with a bucket in their car, because of, you know, so I think what's been helpful for me is just hearing that. I think, like your initial story, there's a lot of different ways suffering is happening out there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the only one. I certainly have some of this, a piece of it. Um, but there are many other people too.
Yeah. Yeah. Being a wounded healer sounds like a great thing until you think about actually trying to live it.
Right.
It's, it's a constant daily practice of struggling with the negativity. It was interesting what you said that about the nourished by negativity. Like we don't often think of negativity as something that nourishes us, but I, for myself, I know there's times where I turn to it. I mentioned earlier, this is something we said we weren't going to do, of like, remember that great conversation we were having when we were checking in with each other before we started recording? So, um, I was mentioning to you that the last few weeks I haven't been sleeping well because with the neuropathy symptoms have really kicked up, and I've got, it's not a lot of pain, but it's this numbness and tingling and burning sensations and muscle spasms and different types of muscle and nerve issues throughout my whole body that just interfere with me being able to sleep. And my mind goes to, first of all, a lot of anger at all the doctors of like, well, why can't they figure out what's going on? They did this to me with this medicine, and now they're saying, blah, 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 whatever it is. And that I feel like I'm brushed aside and I don't have a good explanation for this. And then my mind goes to, and is this going to get worse? Is this my lot now that for a year and a half, I haven't woken up for a year and a half and felt good? I don't know if I've felt good for a year and a half. Every day I feel a little bit kind of weighted down, a little bit burdened, a little bit like the poison in the knee, or a little bit like cracked into 1,000 pieces in my body with these different pains and discomfort. And on the one hand, then I feel guilty because it's not that bad. I go to the cancer center and I see people who are bad off. Today I just went out to eat and I saw a woman who's, completely bald. And I just, as I walked past her, overheard her talking about her GI side effects from whatever treatment she's going through. And so what I'm dealing with is not that bad, but it's not that good either.
How do you live with that?
I don't know. I tried doing a monthly podcast with my friend Chris, but it's not working,
It
Chris.
didn't help. Didn't
It's
work,
not.
did it?
Actually, no, I mean it is. And we've had different times where we've gotten together with some of our friends and done yoga and meditation things. That type of thing helps. But even, this is part of the nourished by the negativity. And this is part of burnout too. When you're burned out, you're emotionally exhausted and physically exhausted. And if someone says, hey, if you did this once a month, or if you did this once a week, or if you did this once a day, or if you did this once an hour, you'd feel better. And I'm like, I don't have the energy. First of all, I don't have the energy for this conversation. Second of all, I don't have the energy to like try and do this, whatever this is, once a month, once a week. That in itself feels like one more thing, like the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, the camel's back's already broken, and you're just piling on extra straws at that point. And it's really hard. I mean, it's how's your book on hope coming? I mean, I'm waiting for that too. I'm waiting for your book on hope because I've thought about this of like a practice of hope. How do you cultivate a practice of hope?
Um, I have to ask you a question. I'll come back to that. But
Hmm.
as a practicing healer, what have you noticed, with what you have, what you're working with, how you're feeling? What have you been noticing about that? I mean, what's the weather report on that, being a healer and also someone who is experiencing suffering and
Hmm. I mean, when I meet somebody who had cancer or who has cancer recently in the last 2 months, I've had two patients come in through triage who are dealing with cancer or possible cancer with really, really significant surgeries and things. And I feel like, you know what? We're on the same team. Like I am going to do everything I can to help support you, even if that means disregarding our triage model where we're supposed to rapidly protocolize people to other providers. Where I'll bend the rules in the system some to say, I'm going to stand by you. And while you're going through this cancer treatment or this chemotherapy or whatever, I'm committed to be with you and to talk with you and to, be by your side because this is tough. It sucks. And a lot of people haven't experienced it.
In that moment, Dave, I just want to ask you this, this may be true or not. Is that where the light enters you?
Yeah, it's a power, really. I feel like all of a sudden, where everything I've been through
Got it.
is something I can draw upon and use for another person so that they feel less alone.
You, and I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question. I'm not avoiding it. But
Let's see. Yeah, it says if Chris avoids answering the question, just roll with it. Okay.
but here's one thing that so I've been reading your book and this one.
Hmm.
And one of the things that really stuck out that I think that you're addressing and I think is really worth bringing up now is, you talk about this idea of transforming suffering rather than trying to eliminate suffering. This is what you said. You're really talking about transforming suffering. And I think that's kind of what you're speaking to now, this transformation of suffering, not eliminating. I think that's a really important idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm going to edit that out of the next edition. It's kind of a pain in the ass to actually live that.
But
Yeah,
fair point.
right.
It's hard, man. That's
Yeah.
brutal.
Yeah.
Fair point.
It's a different relationship, to suffering's a fact of life, death is a fact of life. And so if we have our whole project of living to avoid suffering or to avoid death, then in a way we're avoiding life.
Have
So
you
being a true human means that you're okay. Here was another answer about what's it mean to be a true human, which this would be kind of a typical Joseph Real answer, which would be, well, the thing you've got to remember, Chris, is we don't exist. And so, so when you're trying to exist as a true human, you're not actually existing as a true human. The way to exist as a true human is to recognize that you don't exist and that we're being in vibration and that we're constantly flickering in and out of reality, in and out of, um, in a way, it's like a constant new creation. You probably know this, there's probably a Latin word for, the type of theology where there's a constant new creation every moment. Um, so in a sense, it disconnects you from your ego, it disconnects you from your past, where you're just kind of like, what's in front of me now? What am I experiencing right now? Not what's the baggage of all this that I'm experiencing, or what's all this projecting myself into the future. It's very Buddhist, actually, even though it comes out of his indigenous perspective of, being a true human means that you're not attached to the past or the future.
So it's helping me to understand the word true. When you're truing something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Has your relationship with suffering and disease changed in the past year or so?
Glad you've asked me that question because it reminds me that you're not answering my question about how's your book.
It's like I'll get to it, but it's like
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it has changed just because I'm constantly changing. And here's one of the things that I do in the middle of the night. I came across this sustainable compassion training. John Makransky, who's
yeah, I know John.
yeah, personally,
Yes, I do.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So I listened to his voice in the middle of the night, on these recorded meditations. And then Paul Condon, do you know him?
I know Paul too.
Okay, I'm going to meet with Paul in a little bit. We're going to have a chat maybe later this month. So anyway, there in the Greg Serpa and I have that clinician resilience chapter that we put out in Dave Rakel and Vinny Minicello's integrative medicine text. And so I was reading through there and I came across the sustainable compassion training chapter.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's exactly what we need. We need compassion training, but it needs to be sustainable. Do you have his book?
This is a great book of his.
I just finished reading it. I bought it used and it's signed. I got a signed copy somehow, buying it used.
It's
Yeah.
really great. Yeah.
Yeah. So so one of the meditations that you can download off the Sustainable Compassion Training website is using your suffering to connect to other people's suffering. And actually not even connecting to other people's suffering, but to go from a sense of isolation to a sense of interconnection. So he always talks about the caring field and your benefactors of the people who care for you, so that you get in touch with the people who care for you. Then you remember, okay, this is how I can care for myself. This caring, that caring is it's a transpersonal thing. It's not like something that comes out of your ego. It's something that is just, part of being a true human is that you're caring and compassionate. That's part of our essence, is true humanity. So you connect to that caring field, then you connect to whatever it is you're feeling, the suffering you're feeling, and then you think, how many other people in the world are feeling this same type of suffering? How many people have neuropathy right now? How many people in the world can't sleep right now? And so then you start to go from going deep into these individual symptoms. I have a quote somewhere that the personal, when plumbed deeply enough, becomes universal.
Mhm.
I can't remember who said that. It's in Rehumanizing Medicine. I quote that. So the personal, when plumbed deeply enough, becomes universal. So by going into the nitty gritty of my personal suffering, then I start to think, okay, well, who else is experiencing this? And then you can kind of ripple pool that out a little bit more to who's just experiencing pain. Maybe it's not the same type of pain, or who's worried about the future, who's worried about their health, who's worried about how they're going to get through the next week. And it, just expands and expands, and you realize it's this really profound sense of connecting to it's just to a larger space. And then again, you sort of do the giving and receiving type of thing of, you like you've received the caring, and then you give that caring out to all those people who are experiencing the same thing. But because you're experiencing that, when you're giving that caring out, you're also receiving the caring at the same time that you're giving it out. So it creates that loop. And that's the self-sustaining thing. That's why we can't talk about Mother Teresa, because somehow she's figured out that self-sustaining thing that she, seems to be able to give, and then to give more.
Yeah, what I remember with John Makransky is he has a caring moment practice.
Hmm.
And so just like for a moment, just like you or me or whoever might be listening, just think of, has there been a moment of caring?
Mm-hmm.
And it often is a moment. It's not a,
Mm-hmm.
it could be someone opening the door. Before we recorded, Corbin, your dog, was, lying on his little bed there. Oh, there he is. And, just such a cute, I just feel that, just that, just relax. But what I really liked about part of his practices, and just invite all of us just to think, of like one very moment of caring. It could be if you're able to eat, or you're able to walk, or you're able to enjoy sunshine if you happen to be, or rain, or
Mm-hmm.
a blue sky. It could be just the songbird.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that he invites in these practices is to marinate, and I would say feel them.
Mm-hmm.
And and so what I found in doing these sort of caring moment practices over time is that I noticed I began picking up on others
Mm-hmm.
as they were happening, rather than,
Mm-hmm.
and I just became a little bit more attuned. And I found that to be a very powerful practice.
Yeah.
Certainly, there's the suffering that we've certainly, I think, have given due diligence to today, and balancing your word also that you brought up a few times, balancing that with these caring moments.
Yeah.
and allowing ourselves to be nourished by them as well. Um, to me, just feels like there's a balance there. Is one that I try to be aware of. And you know, like one of the things that in my own case, um, I I think that, and I'm not sure what has led all of this. You know, it could be meditation practices, it could be my environment, it could be so many things. But I resonated with when you were saying when you meet someone who has a diagnosis or is work, that you're just like, you're present. There's just a power. I like that word power. Empowered maybe also could be a word too. So I feel that as well. And also a sense of gratitude. I feel like I see things more vividly, you know, with particularly our people, friendships, being able to do small things, washing dishes, walking up and down the stairs. If I happen to get more sleep, even if it's 5 or 15 minutes, that is like huge. So I become attuned to those caring moments. And I won't say that it's all unicorns and granola and rainbows, um, but it's helpful. And in some way, I'm probably not able to articulate. There was on NPR, and I wanted to make sure this is the other story.
Okay.
A number of years ago, there was
Just before this story, though, I just wanted to make sure it seemed like you were leading up to the meditation that you'd prepared for today that revolved around these themes. So after your story, why don't you lead us in the meditation around that caring moment?
Okay. And I think this might even fit into this. But in Chicago, there was an exhibit a number of years ago. And it was an exhibit of art with persons that have different degrees of woundedness. And there's a story behind that. But one of the main exhibits was picture like a huge ball made of stone, maybe marble, you know, or granite. And what this artist did,
I'd take it for granted. Yeah.
yeah, right, is let's call it granite since you already took the ball and smashed it to many pieces. And then this is the cool thing. The artist put it back together using probably bolts and wire and titled it Shattered Yet Whole. And I think there's something there in that piece that speaks to kind of what we're talking about.
It's like the kintsugi, the Japanese art form where you break the thing and then you put it back together with the gold solder, the pottery or china.
Yeah.
Yeah, because and this could be what Joseph Rael is saying. If we're striving to remain unbroken, we are not being true human beings, because to be a true human being is to be broken and to walk through a doorway. Like here's the image that comes to mind, is that something I've had with him before, of like this idea of doorways. Like I've been working with him and I feel like he's a doorway and I walk through that doorway, and then there's this room and I feel like, I know where I am. And then there's another doorway, and it's like, okay, well, I'm not supposed to stay in this room. I'm supposed to walk across this room, be in this room, look around for a while, go through the next doorway. And it's almost like you can think of a room with closed doors as, you could think of that as whole. It's contained, it's bounded, and you're like, this is me, this little room is me. And then something happens where you open the door, or somebody else opens the door, illness opens the door, whatever, or a window flies open, or a window's cracked, and you realize this little idea of who I thought I was is no longer safe and secure. It's broken in some way. But then when you go through that, you use that as a portal and you're in this bigger space and you're like, wow, I'm so glad I took the journey of the wounded healer. I cut my finger on a piece of paper and now, I had this profound insight and I'm all better and I'm the wounded healer now. And then you're like, oh crap, okay, now something happens in this bigger room. you know? And so the the becoming a true human means it's a perpetual process of not getting attached to the room that you find yourself in and thinking more about doorways and less about bounded rooms.
And now I can answer your question, which is the whole idea behind my second book. It's called Hope Opens Doors.
Mm,
And kind of the idea behind which I kind of say in the introduction is, walking through a doorway, whatever doorway that
mhm,
is, I think, often there's some inspiration or maybe suffering. But once you walk through the doorway, I don't think many of us know what's next.
mhm,
I mean, it really, that's the point where it can get interesting or we can get stuck or, I mean, a whole variety of things.
mm,
But that's to me is what makes it interesting is sure, there will be a doorway that is clear. But once you walk in, it's uncertainty.
mhm,
And to some degree, part of our conversation today has been how you and I and many, many, many other human beings are walking in that uncertainty. And it's like we don't know. Maybe there'll be a door. Maybe there won't be. Maybe we'll be lost for 10 or 20 or 30 years. Maybe we'll meet other people. There's just so many options. And so part of what I was exploring is how do we meet those moments, of uncertainty, of not knowing? How do we continue to walk? There's a great story,
mm.
the room of 10,000 demons.
Oh,
And the idea is that you would walk in this door, and this only would happen once every 100 years, Dave.
mhm,
Uh, and the idea is you were given very simple instructions. Walk through this door, walk through the room. There'll be another door at the end of the room. Just walk through that. That's it. However, when you walked into the room of 10,000 demons knew those things that frightened you, and they would do everything to amplify whatever fear or, let's say, negative thoughts. So for instance, for me, that would be snakes. If I would walk in the room at 10,000 demons, there would be snakes hanging, they'd be on the floor, it would be, ugh, right?
mhm.
And the persons who have done it give two bits of advice. And I forget the first. No, I had to say that.
Mhm.
The first, the first bit of advice is whatever you do, just keep walking. Whatever you do, just keep walking. And I did forget the second piece of advice, so I guess
It's okay.
I'll let that
First
one
piece,
go.
maybe it's the second piece of advice is remember the first piece of advice.
Yeah.
Mm, yeah. I was thinking, Chris, too, of like, there's times where we get on some type of a seeking path where we're like, I'm trying to get somewhere. And then you're looking for that door and you're like, there's no door here. And so you're like feeling everywhere. You're trying to get out of this room. And it's interesting that the seeking mindset is also a little bit like the avoidance mindset, where you're in this room and you're like, this room is filling up with boiling oil and I need to get out of it right now. I'm uncomfortable in this room. I want to get, to the place where I'm a healed healer and not the wounded healer, because this wound is, it's festering. Um, and so then you're looking for this door to appear. And it seems like sometimes it's hard to find that door. Maybe it's on the floor or the ceiling. Maybe it's in your heart. There's times where you're like looking outside and all of a sudden you're like, oh, dang, I forgot again, going inside. So no matter how many times you've gone through these doors, the next room is a room. Maybe we might not say 10,000 demons. We'll say 10,000 tricksters, who are trying to distract you from whatever it is, or so you really learn it. Do do you know, it's in the book. Um, the story, it's Louis the chiropractor, um, who's working, it's from a movie, a quote from a movie, and I can't remember the name of the movie right now, but the quote is something like, it's a referencing Eckhart, and it says something like, you may feel like there's these devils that are tearing you apart, but really they're angels trying to loosen your attachments to whatever it is so you can move to the next stage.
Yeah, that's great. I read something this week about practice,
Mm-hmm.
and this author said, really, the whole purpose of practice is to soften us
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
instead of harden us. And Clint, the Clint, it's really, really just about softening
Yeah.
ourselves. And I think caring moments can do that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you have one for us?
Let's just do a quick practice and then I'll let you wrap up.
Okay.
So find a posture, whatever that posture might be for you, that invites relaxation and attentiveness. And for some persons, it can be sitting with the back straight. Eyes can be open or closed. Just making it a posture that for you, an embodied posture that invites the sense of alertness, attentiveness, and relaxation. And just see if that's possible. Sometimes we can invite the breath if that is available. And breathe in, and particularly on the exhale, just inviting the body to settle. And you may notice as you do this that there may be parts of the body that are contracted. Could be the jaw, shoulders. Sometimes we say, see if it's possible to invite your body to relax just 3%. And just notice how you do that. And if they're overachievers, Dave would say 4%, but no more. So just inviting the body to just to be, not having to do, not having to fix. This sense of just being. My way of understanding being is, you ever had a dinner party and you invited people over and you fix the meal, you have the dinner, and you do the dishes, and then there's that moment when you just sit on the couch, maybe, or your favorite chair, and you just go, ah. So that's sort of what we're inviting. And then next, the invitation is to be open to consider a caring moment in your life. And we're just looking for moments. It could be the fact that you're able to stand or sit. It might be something that someone said. It could be an animal coming to you with a tail wagging or rubbing against your leg. A caring moment, just allowing that to rise in your heart. And if your mind wanders, that's welcome to being human. But after you notice the mind wandering, coming back to a caring moment, and to the degree that you are able today in this moment, maybe allowing yourself just to lean in, to feel that moment as best as you're able. Noticing as as you invite this caring moment, how does it feel in your body? Where do you feel it in your body? And what do you notice in terms of just thinking and thoughts? Does it speed thoughts up? Does it slow thoughts down? Again, just being curious. No right answers here. We're just exploring. And then as you, again, invite this caring moment, just notice if you're able to connect with any feelings. What feelings might arise as you invite this caring moment? Just breathe in, inviting this caring moment, maybe a little bit more into your body, to your mind. And then next, just letting go of this particular practice and just returning to just allowing yourself to be held. You're in a chair or couch, just allowing yourself just simply to be, just to be right where you are, to be held and supported, not having to do anything, be anything. And then if your eyes are closed, with all the time in the world, just inviting you to open your eyes and come back. And again, if it's helpful, sometimes you can just kind of look around where you're at, just to kind of help you to come back to your space, orient yourself as we find ourselves in another room.
Mm-hmm. Here we are. Yeah, thank you, Chris. No, I was thinking of when you said coming back into the chair, and I was thinking the way that Joseph Rael often will teach is this will be sort of my version of his version of teaching, and he'll be like, "Oh, hold it right there, chair, 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 chair. Just say that word and feel what are the sounds, what are the being and vibrations of the word chair." And then he's got like different consonants and vowels. They have different meanings, esoteric meanings that he's sort of meditated into, and he'll bring up. But I'm not going to go into that esoteric realm as much as just sort of an associational realm of chair. What does it mean? Chair is caring. That's a C. H, holding. It's holding you in place. Chair. And the A is it's accepting. Whatever you're coming to the chair is not, I'm not going to hold you in that right now. Whatever you're bringing, I'm going to accept you and hold you. And I is kind of like an integrity. The chair has an integrity. It's not going to, kind of deform under the weight of whatever it is that you're plopping down into it. No matter how many times you plop it down into the chair has still got that integrity. And then the R is repose. And so there's a sense of repose in the chair. And so just the meaning, the vibrational meanings or essences of the word chair have something that you can kind of unpack and understand in a way that transforms your experience of sitting in a chair.
I don't think I'll sit in the chair quite the same again.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then just to think of how many other things that.
Right. Yeah. The sort of, what is it? The esoterics of everyday life.
That's great.
Yeah. It's another good one, Chris. It's always good talking to you.
Same here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We didn't really follow the outline, did we?
No, I mean, here's what I got for our outline. I do have the outline here, and
Yeah,
That's what I figure as well. You
this was
didn't,
the outline, and then this is the one that we followed.
you read a different poem.
I know.
And did you see how I was supposed to do the practice, but every time I'm going to try to make you do the practice. So, well, we'll keep seeing if we can get it right. Maybe next time when I'll tell you what, Chris, when we follow the outline, it's time for us to stop doing this
Quick,
podcast.
I agree. I'm totally on that.
That seems like a good plan. So, all right. Well, I'm going to stop recording here until the next time on Becoming a True Human podcast. I'm David Kopacz, and this is
Chris Smith, or Mary Chris Smith, as we were talking about earlier.
yep, Merry Chris Smith. Okay. See you next time, everyone.